Oh wow, I had to edit the whole of the video. I was just about to publish it in the Movie Maker. Now I'm going to have to re-edit the whole thing. Delay. Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3, reportedly likely to be postponed from July the 24th date due to COVID outbreak in Fury's camp. No official decision made yet. And this is according to ESPN. There's been a COVID outbreak in Fury's camp. It's understood that no official decision has been made, but a postponement appears inevitable. You could kind of see it coming, couldn't you? I want to shout out Mighty Max. He observed that it could be due to the tickets not selling. I mean, who really wants to see this apart from Wilder diehards? Tyson Fury is one of the most suspect boxers ever. And that's just my opinion. He's one of the most suspect boxers ever. How many pullouts? How many fights has he ducked? How many excuses will the likes of Gareth A. Davis give this guy? And he's supposed to be mainstream media. If Gareth A. Davis is mainstream media, he's one of the biggest problems in boxing because he shouldn't be mainstream media. He really shouldn't. In fact, Deontay Wilder's suspect as well. They're both very suspect. So we went from looking forward to an undisputed fight to AJ making a routine defense against Usyk. I really don't think Usyk's going to be much trouble for AJ. And maybe he's going to prove me wrong, but I just don't see it. I don't see it. I hope AJ's taking it more serious than I am. Well, obviously, he's going in the ring, so he's going to be. We went from this to no Fury and Wilder fight. What do you reckon? Any validity to what Minimax is saying? Tickets not selling? Remember, Fury got that foot injury in the build-up to the rematch against Vlad, and that cancelled that in 2016, and we didn't see him back in the ring till 2018. And a lot of people were speculating that the foot injury Fury suffered in the build-up for Vlad was nothing but a cover for poor ticket sales. Tickets weren't selling. Well, we could have another arbitration on our hands if Fury gets this all sorted and Wilder wants to fight him again and Fury tries to walk away. These two are some bums, man. I don't care what no one says. You saw John was trying to get him out of this fight as well. John was trying to get him out of the Wilder fight. His dad. And all of a sudden, COVID. Now anyone can get COVID. Obviously, there's a virus, it's a worldwide pandemic. But he's still suspect. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe John did want Tyson to pull out of the Wilder fight and fight AJ. I don't believe he wanted the AJ fight. I think John just wanted him to pull out of the Wilder fight. That's where I'm going to go with it. His dad was saying, oh, I want him to fight AJ, but they don't listen to me, do they, huh? Got millions of yes men round him. Anything rushed isn't good. Huh?
Fake it till you make it.
What you think about 210, 215,000 pay-per-view buys, Beats? What do you make of that?
Well, why don't we say 190?
Really? Yeah.
He ain't done 200.
Is it time to pull the trigger on that fight, Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think, look, it all depends. I mean, because, look, I mean, I know for a fact that Gervonta's fight, I think from my sources, did about maybe 50,000 pay-per-view homes and about 40,000 digital. So you combine that, that's about 90,000 pay-per-views. So I don't know if that fight is maybe ready to be made, but when it is, which maybe can be first quarter of next year. First quarter of next year is not that far along. I think it gives everybody time to prepare for it, because Gervonta's getting more popular, he's getting recognized more, he's fighting like a beast. Ryan Garcia, we all know he has a super crazy, fan base, and he's getting better. We have to let him, kind of like recover a bit from what's taking place with him. We have to respect that. So I think first quarter of next year, I think a big fight like that can happen.
Fake it till you make it.
Now, take what Floyd said with a pinch of salt about in-house fights. If they knew it could do 2 million pay-per-views like what Mike Tyson did recently, they'd do the cross-promotion and make the fight. But they can't get nowhere near that. This is the fight you're saying is some big fight. It's a big fight. It's not a big fight. It's not. If the math is correct, the fight will be made. Did Floyd not fight on HBO and Showtime against Pacquiao? Now, let's bear in mind, Oscar's probably embellishing on whatever he heard or whatever he claims he heard, what the real figures are. So I don't think it did as bad as Oscar is saying, but it did nowhere near as good as Leonard Ellaby or Mike Coppinger might want to tell you.
let me read this super chat. For how long it took the numbers to come out for this fight compared to other fights that were rumored to tank, like Spence versus Garcia? That's true. That's true. It took them a full 7 days to come out with these numbers, whereas after Spence versus Porter, in about 48 to 72 hours, 3 days, you had numbers. With this one, it took a full week. So I'm inclined to believe that this shit didn't even do 200, 210. I don't think it did. I think it did 190, maybe 180, maybe.
To all the people who was in the comment section of my video trying to tell me how big a fight Tank and Ryan is, well, Oscar just shut all of that down. He just shut it all down. What he's telling us now, if he and Leonard can really put the brainwash on the likes of you, that they can maybe do the fight in the first quarter of next year. And I guess they'll be targeting around between 300 and 500 pay-per-view buys, success, I guess. And anything over that, great. But that will be a pay-per-view that owes as much to the promotion than the fighter's accomplishments. Don't you understand that? The genuine, authentic super fights are the ones where the fight promotes itself, basically.
I don't know if that fight is maybe ready to be made.
See how fresh your mouth was in my comment section? See why I blocked you? I told you everything beforehand before Oscar said it. That if this fight was as big as you are saying, it would have been made. Oscar's telling you the fight's not ready. He's saying the first quarter of next year. Trust me, he's not going to be ready by the first quarter of next year. Neither of them by the first quarter of next year would have fought any significant opposition to make it any bigger than what it is now. So I was right. See, the argument against Tank versus Josh Taylor, here's the argument now. America has been through a period with bad promoters like Oscar. Didn't Canelo just bail on him? The biggest draw in the game just bailed on you? Have you seen Anthony Joshua bail on Eddie Hearn? Nope. He's bailed on you. Why? Bad promoter. Leonard Ellaby, bad promoter. Floyd, great fighter, not a good promoter. They're trying to sell you style. I don't even know if style is the right word, but hype over substance. That's what they're trying to sell you. So yeah, a legitimate undisputed fight in America doesn't get no play. Deontay Wilder hasn't tried to top all the belts, and he's had opportunities, big opportunities. Tyson Fury, he said after he fights Wilder, if he's successful, he's going to have a voluntary. Oh, you're not going to fight for undisputed? No. And that voluntary is not going to be against Dillian White. Jamel Charlo, he's going to fight Brian Costano for undisputed at 154. But what's the truth about that fight? I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be a great achievement for whoever wins. No doubt. But what's the truth? All the gene pool of talent at 154 is within the PBC. So it was easy to get there. But the facts are, a lot of the super fights today will require a cross promotion, because you get to a point where the dominant fighters on one promotion are going to eliminate the rest of their competition on the roster, and the dominant fighters on the other promotions, vice versa. They're basically out of in-house fights to feed the dominant fighters. The rival promoters really need to work with each other, basically. So that Charlo fight, it's been easy to make because he's been fighting in-house PBC fighters. None of them real big stars. I like Tony Harrison. He's a good fighter. Rosario, you know, not bad, but we just saw him get knocked out by Erickson Lubin. But none of them are big stars. That fight's probably not going to hit the 500,000 mark. It's an undisputed fight. So that's the state of play in America right now. So you could argue, yeah, the Josh Taylor fight probably isn't shit. Yeah, due to bad American boxing promotion. I mean, Floyd, what was Floyd thinking? You're going to build Tank into this star. But you could argue that Floyd sabotaged him. Didn't he just go in the ring weeks before in a fight that he himself said was fake? Floyd participated in this fake exhibition bout and robbed the bank, as he said, 1 million pay-per-view buys. Now you're pitching your kid in against this no-name, no-hoper. No disrespect to Barris, good fighter, but... And now Tank's relying on Leonard Ellaby in his garish shoots, gassing the place up, because he hasn't got a proper fight. And then coincidentally, Oscar's planning to do the same thing to Ryan. He's coming back as well on Triller. Why aren't they concentrating and promoting Tank and Ryan if it's such a big fight, rather than themselves. They had their time. Everybody knew with the length of time it took to get them figures out, they were trying to find a way they could fudge the numbers. Everybody knew this. Because of the unwillingness in American boxing to do cross-promotional fights, they're having to oversell and overhype their fighters to get them any traction. And it's not working. Now, unless you're going to do this breakaway UFC type format or structure, it's getting tiring and it's not working. Boxing has been around longer than UFC. They've already got their breakaway league that separates them from the rest of MMA. When are you going to do it and just get out of everybody's way? At least then I don't need to worry about you doing cross-promotional fights because I know it's all in-house. I don't have to get frustrated with what you're doing because I know what you're going to do. But as it stands now, there's too many fights that can be made and no reason they shouldn't be made not being made. We know if the UFC fighters have signed a contract with Dana, there's only a certain gene pool of fighters they're going to be fighting. And everybody knows what they're getting. It's called structure. Founded in 1909, the Boxing News is the oldest boxing publication that's still in circulation today. 112 years. Now, Matt Christie has came out saying the Boxing News in its 112 years has never experienced such a convoluted world champion system as the one in place today, and they will no longer support it. In some weight classes, there are as many as 7 fighters owning WBC, WBA, IBF, or WBO belts, which proclaim them to be world champion. Indeed, the WBA even recognizes up to 5 fighters in a single division with a claim to its quote-unquote world title. Despite the occasional promise from those organizations to restore some semblance of order, the opposite has occurred. Of course, we support unification fights, they say. We just need to create some more belts to allow that to happen. And so along comes super, regular, interim, gold, silver, and franchise belts that we're told are good for the sport, short term, or for as long as fans continue to buy into this nonsense. It could be argued that more belts create extra revenue opportunities for boxers, but basic common sense shouldn't tell anyone that generating more mess doesn't clean up an existing mess. In the long term, such garbage will build and build to the point people can't stand to look at it no more. No matter for now, far too many promoters, broadcasters, and influential journalists embellish these new belts to the extent they become genuine titles. But how can they be genuine? Who besides the sanctioning bodies earning money from them has checked the credentials of all of these titles? All they're actually doing is demanding more sanctioning fees, which are being paid because, in the eyes of promoters, these new belts, regardless of how bogus they are, add some prestige to the fights that they're going to promote. It is no secret that certain promoters favor certain organizations because they know their fighters will get high rankings within those particular rankings. That alone should be a huge concern. It's impossible to think of another sport in which there are so many world champions around, both past and present, who have achieved this status without proving themselves to be the best in the world. The Boxing News calculates no fewer than 74 of the 81 active male world champions in 17 weight classes have not yet won a contest that could have resulted in them being universally declared the best in their division. A boxer independently ranked number 10 in the world, for example, might beat a rival independently ranked number 17 in the world, and then call themselves a world champion because they now own a belt with those words engraved upon it. This kind of scenario happens all too often, and it's then widely reported that the winner is now a world champion in a division in which numerous other world champions already exist. New fans are being hoodwinked. The sanity of the educated hangs by a thread. Attempting to make sense of it all is a puzzle without a solution. It's not the fact that there are so many belt holders that's the real problem. The real problem is that belt holders are under no pressure to fight other belt holders. And even when they try to, such contests are ludicrously difficult to arrange Boxers are therefore often forced to defend their belts against obscure and undeserving challengers. And this is the real kicker. Organizations do not rank belt holders from other organizations. As a result of this, the more champions there are, the few genuine contenders there are in each of the sanctioning body's top 10, because so many boxers are already aligned to one organization or another. Anthony Joshua will not find Tyson Fury listed under any of the heavyweight rankings he presides over. The fact that the WBA, IBF and WBO do not classify Fury as a top 10 heavyweight should confirm to everyone that the current system is grotesquely flawed. Think about this some more. 3 or 4 sanctioning bodies we are asked to place our trust in, who essentially govern the sport by default, do not rate Tyson Fury, the fighter who beat Vladimir Klitschko and Deontay Wilder. They do not rank him as a top 10 heavyweight. Moreover, the WBC omit Anthony Joshua from their rankings, though they do rank several fighters who Joshua has beaten, simply because he doesn't have a green belt. We can all rant and rave about Joshua and Fury not fighting each other, but the truth of the matter is that they operate in a sport in which, quite simply, they do not have to. When we are essentially relying on the boxers' respective teams to do the right thing, it's little surprise, therefore, that fights such as Fury and Joshua never leave the negotiating table. Contests like Spence-Crawford don't even get as far as that table. So what can we do about it is what Matt Christie is asking. He says the boxing news are not delusional. There's only so much they can do. But as the oldest and most independent boxing publication in existence, they're saying they're going to do the right thing and hope that others might take notice. From this issue onwards, the boxing news will not be calling any fighter who has won an alphabet title a world champion. Indeed, to avoid any hint of confusion, they will not even call them a champion. So now, when they have to reference the sanctioning bodies, such fighters will be known as belt holders, title holders, or titleists. The only fighters boxing news will classify as world champions will be those who have actually proven themselves to be the best in the world, regardless of the belts they own. They will no longer use the word undisputed or unified. Such phrases merely empower sanctioning bodies, unless provided context for doing so. In simple terms, world champions are world champions. No prefix is required and can be only created by the number 1 in a weight class fighting the number 2, or in a situation in which an existing world champion loses their title in the ring to ascertain the number 1 and 2, and of course 3 to 10 in each weight class. Boxing News will now incorporate the transnational boxing rankings, who they claim are fiercely independent. Their mission statement is as follows. The Transnational Boxing Rankings Board is an all-volunteer initiative formed in October 2012 with the intention of providing professional boxing with authoritative top 10 rankings, identifying the singular world champion of every division by unbiased reasoning and common sense, and insist on the sport's reform, unlike the Ring magazine. Taking a little shot there. Unlike the Ring magazine, whose rankings policy can generally be admired, that's in brackets. It looks like they're saying that the transnational boxing rankings are not aligned with the Ring magazine. Well, what do I think? I think this would have had more clout pre-social media era if they had started doing that then. I think it's a little too late in the day. The boxing news doesn't have the pull and influence that it had back in the day. I know 100% it was held in extremely high esteem by American boxing journalists because of its ability to deliver weekly boxing news. Weekly, every week, without fail. Not once a month, weekly. You get boxing news from around the world. And they still do that, but today you've got Boxing Scene, who are very good, in my opinion. Twitter, you go in there, you can get an abundance of news. YouTube. We've got several channels that constantly keep the boxing fan updated on what's going on. And that's just a minute number of sources I'm quoting there that you can get online, that you can get boxing news from. If Anthony Joshua's got 3 belts and you're saying you're not going to recognize that, I'm not saying that the boxing news are necessarily going to do this, but theoretically they could say they're not going to base his standing on his 3 belts. They're going to decide who the world champion is. So they might decide who's the best heavyweight out there on the result of the 3rd Wilder and Fury fight. When Joshua has tried to make contact with these guys for undisputed, both of them have turned down career highest paydays not to fight Joshua. The Ring magazine have Tyson Fury as the champion, when Joshua has made more defenses and has held his belts, his 3 belts, longer than Tyson Fury held his 3 belts. You can't just dismiss the belts and say that's a solution, when in Anthony Joshua's case, he's tried to do the right thing so far. Now, like you say, Fury is not ranked by any of the sanctioning bodies where Joshua holds belts. If one of them 3 sanctioning bodies was to rank Fury number 1 and mandate him, then we'd get the undisputed fight. But that's not something Anthony Joshua can control. His promoter went all out to try and make the fight with Fury. Bob Arum said that arbitration won't be a problem, but now we're still getting the 3rd Wilder and Fury fight. Wilder turned down the DAZN deal, which would have got him an undisputed fight. But they're still picking the winner of Fury and Wilder as the Ring magazine champion. And that's something the Boxing News might do when they've turned down the shots. It's not just the sanctioning bodies, it's the promoters. If you can't get the promoters on board with what you're doing, how the fuck is it going to work? Okay, what if Frank Warren says, I don't want the Boxing News covering our shows, you don't recognise none of our world champions? Or Mick Hennessy says the same thing, or Eddie Hearn says the same thing. What are you going to do then? You say you're not going to recognise unified or undisputed champions. So where does that leave Anthony Joshua? Or Josh Taylor? Or Juan Estrada? Jamel Charlo? What if other countries follow suit? All you're going to get is tribalism and bias. They say, okay, let's not recognise the belts. As far as we're concerned, Gervonta Davis is the number 1 140-pounder of Josh Taylor and his 4 belts. What then? All you're doing, really, is what the PBC are doing with Terence Crawford. Oh, let's not acknowledge him because we don't like his belt. All you're doing is what ESPN was doing with Tyson Fury before he beat Wilder. Let's say you think he's the number 1 heavyweight and he hasn't got a belt. You don't recognise the belts already. You can just say he's number 1 heavyweight. Why? Oh, because he beat Vlad before AJ did. Yeah, you also had to serve a backdated ban for Nandrolone, which would mean he would have eventually got stripped of his other 2 belts after he lost the IBF because he didn't face his mandatory. He would have got stripped anyway for a PED violation. If anyone follows your blueprint, they can use it to manipulate people who have honestly earned their belts and built their resumes with title defenses and have seeked out unifications. And if you're trying to revisit some old school standard, that's not working either. By calling them title holders rather than WBC champion, WBO champion, WBA champion, IBF champion, you're still recognizing that they have some status by calling them title holders or belt holders. Now, either you have one man you recognize as world champion per weight class, and everybody you rank below him is a contender. You haven't changed anything. Leonard Ellaby would love this system. Yeah, well, you know, Josh Taylor's 4 belts don't mean anything. All the fighters he's fought, it doesn't mean nothing to the American public. They relate to Tank. Tank's been in the bigger fights over here. He does bigger gates than Josh Taylor over here. Josh Taylor has only been a title holder in 1 weight class. Tank is a 3-weight title holder, 5-time world champion. What you got to say to that, Josh Taylor? Now understand this. The IBF got established around 1983. So that put 3 sanctioning belts in the game. IBF, WBC, WBA. Frank Warren's first champion was an IBF champion, Terry Marsh. Mickey Duff, around 1989, he had Duke McKenzie. He won the IBF flyweight title. Duke lost that belt to Dave McCauley from Northern Ireland, promoted by Barney Eastwood, who used to promote Barry McGuigan. When the WBO came into focus, we had the whole Michael Watson, Nigel Benn, and Eubank fights, which for the most part were for the WBO belt. For a while, that was very sustainable for Frank Warren and Barry Hearn. They didn't have to send their middleweights or super middleweights out there to face Roy Jones, James Toney, or a Hopkins, or a Reggie Johnson, or anyone dangerous out there. The WBO was the belt of choice that got everybody well paid, promoters and boxers. Watson, until he got injured, Eubank and Ben became household names on the WBO belt. In fairness, Nigel did have to go to America and rip that belt from Doug DeWitt. And he defended it against Iron Barkley, in all fairness. But I remember the IBF and the WBO when they came into play. I remember. And there was a lot more world title fights over here, all of a sudden. A whole lot more. Bet you any money, the boxing news circulation went up considerably. Now they were having more world title fights to cover as British boxing became more popular. Colin McMillan, Nassim Hamed, they both held that WBO featherweight title. Joe Calzaghe, his first belt was a WBO belt. I bet they weren't complaining then. I bet there's only a couple of you who were watching this weekly who can remember names like Paul Silky Jones. He won a WBO world title in the 90s. But the boxing news, they don't put as much issues in the shops as they used to because there's no demand for it like that. The likes of Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, they don't really do boxing news interviews. Why? Because you can do a video interview now on IFL or Seconds Out on Boxing Social and do how much views? 50,000, 100,000? Maybe 1 million, I don't know. They do loads of views, go viral. They don't have to schedule a date when they're going to meet up with Harry Mullen. You don't remember that name. Matt Christie or Tris Dixon, whoever's there. They don't have to do all that no more. So they don't have that same relationship with the promoters that they used to. Eddie Hearn is doing his own media now. They got some slick tech company in, and Matchroom are doing their own media. You think Boxing News would have tried this in the 90s or the 80s? Just being honest. But the answer is no. Because it wouldn't really be the sanctioning bodies they're defying. It would be Frank Warren and Barry. And if they couldn't cover their fights or their cards or get no accreditation to cover their cards, interview their boxers, they're done. The Boxing News is finished. So while it may look like a bold move, I'm not so convinced. I know that magazine thoroughly. I wish I'd kept all my copies, but I haven't. If they had done this move in the 90s, when they were covering Colin Dunn as a WBU champion and the likes of Ricky Hatton, it would have more credibility. But I remember the Boxing News covering all these fights and all these champions that Britain wouldn't have had without the proliferation of belts. Now, I'm not going to pretend I know what state their business is in right now, but they're continuing for the love of what they do right now. I don't think there's much profit in it right now. They don't even let you read whole articles. You got to pay to read articles. You can read a quarter of the article and then they want you to pay for it, right? The circulation of hard copies in shops is not as visible as it used to be. So they're making this gesture when they don't have that much to lose anymore because they're not a major player in boxing journalism right now. They're not. They're not. I'll end it like this. If they had cozy relationships with the major promoters in boxing, would they be doing this? That's the $1 million question. So I read it thoroughly enough, the article, and Wilder said they're coming up with a master plan to cheat again in their trilogy, as he insists he wasn't knocked out in the rematch. Well, quite defeatist, isn't it? I mean, because if Deontay took it to arbitration to get the rematch and got the rematch, and he's still bringing this up, it's almost like a built-in excuse for the inevitable, almost the inevitable. He might win, you never know, but the more likely result is Tyson Fury wins again, and if we arrive at that outcome, he wants to be able to say Tyson Fury couldn't do it clean. He had to play dirty. He better get the right man in there to oversee the hand wrapping, preferably a black man, Malik maybe. He better know where his water is coming from. I'm sure Shelley or Al have enough influence that Kenny Bayless, the crab in the bucket referee according to Wilder, will not be refereeing. As for the costume, I don't know if it's affiliated to anybody. The costume seems to be a bit mercenary, Could they take some stuff off the costume, make it a little lighter, or perhaps don't wear it? He had a go at the media for not addressing all the cheating that Tyson Fury was doing. But then again, he didn't address Tyson Fury at all at the presser, so he needs to be like Nonito Donaire. Don't just rely on the CPB. Make sure you do independent VADA testing out of your own pocket, because the only claim that Wilder can make against Fury that may have some legitimacy is if he's a clean athlete, because he has been popped for nandrolone. So don't lose the fight and then say Tyson cheated and you cheaped out on VADA testing. Nobody wants to hear that. And of course, don't let Anthony Durrell in the arena. So Malik wants to play around with Mike Tyson's quote that everybody's got a plan till they get hit, saying it was him who that applied to when he got hit. Perhaps you didn't see the Bone Crusher Smith fight when he got tagged with the right hand in the 12th and last. Tony Tucker was 6'5", 82-inch reach, had 27 knockouts and 34 wins, no losses when Mike Tyson fought him. And Mike got rocked by a great uppercut and came straight back at it. You see, the Tyson resume is exceptional. Don't be telling me about Hall of Famers he didn't fight, because if I got any of you online and I asked you about George Foreman's resume, Sonny Liston's, you'll be mumbling and stumbling and tripping all over yourself, not being able to mention any names. Yeah? If you don't know what you're talking about, just leave it. Perhaps you didn't see the two Ruddock fights. Perhaps he didn't see how much punishment he actually took before getting knocked out by Buster Douglas. I wanted to stay silent, but to hear somebody who epitomizes what Mike Tyson said actually trying to debunk Mike's quote about everybody's got a plan till they get hit, go watch the Derek Chisora fight and see if Malik Scott doesn't epitomize what Mike was saying. Malik got hit by an overhand right from Derek in a fight that was in the balance. Malik allowed himself to be counted out and just walked back to his corner. It was almost like he forgot he was in a fight. It was the least of his concerns. So what Mike said was right, because Malik got hit, and whatever plan he and his team had going into that fight, Malik was like, "No, I don't remember that. What plan?" He was like, "I don't even box. I'm not a boxer. Who's Derek Chisora? I wasn't fighting him. What are you talking about?" Mike said that quote in the 80s, and people still quote it today because Mike's a legend. Hagler said, what was it? It's hard to get up and train when you're sleeping in silk sheets. That was in the 80s, and they still quote it today because Hagler's a legend. R.I.P. Joe Louis said he can run, but he can't hide. They can still quote that because he's a legend. Malik, until you can tell me something about your career that they're going to quote years later, you're out of pocket for talking about Mike like that. I don't want to hear keep that energy when you see Malik. Tell Malik to keep that energy when he sees Mike Tyson.